Ma'am, ma'am. Perhaps it will take time to get. Okay.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm sorry for this bit of a disturbance, but that always happens when you're going with your, if you're not using your own laptop and other thing. Thank you so much, Dr. Chugh, for a very kind introduction, and to the Galgotia University for this kind invitation and opportunity. I know you must be very impatient because already it's 1:15 or so, and I hope you had your lunch. If not, then I have to quickly rush it because I don't want to delay your lunch very long. Now, you are kind of my second generation students because Dr. Manasi Sinha was our student. So you are students of Dr. Manasi Sinha. So it's a second generation in that sense. But I'm also grateful. Yeah, we were just talking about Dr. Manasi Sinha, so she's here. Um, it's easier now for me after you have already heard many of the lectures concerning Europe. I saw the program and the European institutions, the way European foreign policy and other issues work. So I don't really have to start from the scratch or give you some very basics about this because you already saw 7 or 8 days now you are doing that. So today I'll not talk about broader economic issues or issues concerning what do you say, the foreign policy or the basic structure of the European Union, which you are by now, I'm sure, familiar. So we'll talk about today about which is something very interesting, a very important thing is happening in Europe. The Europe is also there's a major issue which they are discussing today about the climate change, and the European leaders, European nations, and the European Union, they are also trying to become leader in this climate change negotiations. And now, in recent days or recent months, you might have also read about certain kind of energy crisis issues which is faced by European countries, particularly after the Ukraine war. Because as you know, the Russia is very European countries are very much dependent on Russian energy, and there are certain issues. So I'll come back to many of these issues together. Now, this issue is about the European Green Deal, which has become a big major policy issue in these days in Europe. But this European Green Deal, since I have also been teaching a couple of courses about European economic integration or European energy security at the Jawaharlal Nehru University to our postgraduate students. So I'll try to explain this European Green Deal through two of their major policies, which is their environment policy and also their energy policy, and then come back to what exactly this European Green Deal is. And also, as I said, the current issues faced by the European countries. Now, this European Green Deal was announced by the European Commission President. As you know, by now, there is a European Commission, there's a Council, there's everything you might have known by now. So when the new European Commission came, so the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, who used to be earlier Defense Minister of Germany, so she announced this European Green Deal in December 2019. So one major thing about this European Green Deal is that Europe wants to become the first climate neutral continent by 2050. So it means the ambition is that by 2050, they would not be adding more CO2 gases into the atmosphere. And to achieve that particular target, basically they have very tough emission targets, increased support for biodiversity. At the same time, all kind of subsidies to agriculture, etc., what they are giving. So there are large number of policies which includes this European Green Deal, which has also been built on, as I'll try to explain, to the earlier policies concerning environment and energy policies. Now, if you look at this video, which is about 2 minutes video, which can explain, your European Green Deal in a, how do I just do that? How do I play this video here? Yeah, the video is here, but it's in the slide. It's inside the slide. But can I just
stop this and then we can play videos.
The PowerPoint is there.
sorry? Isn't PowerPoint? Yes,
It's coming on the
this here it should show the start video.
Just stop the share वहाँ से फिर करते हैं.
No, it will not really.
Where is the PowerPoint?
Yeah,
Yes.
should I press it?
Yes.
But there's a voice.
Stop करना पड़ेगा. Then you have to predict
Okay.
it.
Okay. Okay. So just give me a second.
So you are not now sharing with the other?
It's coming.
Coming.
Okay. Just a second. Okay, shall I start? Okay, so if you just look at this video for 2 minutes video, but there's no voice. There's no voice. Laptop is the
नहीं उनको उसको प्रोटेक्ट करना पड़ेगा उस वाले वॉइस को. क्योंकि वॉइस वहाँ से जा रहा है.
But why this? There's no voice on this.
Yeah, yeah. This voice is connected to.
अनम्यूट करना पड़ेगा. आपको म्यूट करना पड़ेगा.
Will it work now?
Speaker.
ये कर
नीचे बोलो।
same as
It's not worse. So anyway, forget about this video, we can go beyond. But there are a couple of other videos that I will not show them.
नहीं
उसको वो प्रॉब्लम है।
YouTube पे चल रहा है
YouTube पे नहीं चल रहा है। This is part of the
हाँ, इसमें YouTube चल रहा है।
वो क्लोज कर दीजिए ब्राउज़र पे
No, but that has nothing to do with this. Even if YouTube is on. Problem is
It's
the one.
not coming.
इसमें चेंज करो ना ये स्वाइप में वॉइस में
Anyway, we'll just
How to make
go
Europe
without this video.
climate neutral by 2050. The first thing that we do is what is it? It's the big idea and top priority of the new. The European Green Deal. What is it? It's the big idea and top priority of the new.
So it's okay. It's coming.
सिस्टम का ही रखना है इसको क्योंकि अभी हम लोगों ने प्रोजेक्ट सारा किया अपना
System.
No, I think you forget about this video.
I
We can go.
think, yes, sir.
We can just go
Just
without.
go ahead.
Led by Ursula von der Leyen, and it's all about how to make Europe climate neutral.
No, otherwise.
The Europe
Okay, anyway, so since there is a certain problem with the videos which are not working, so there are
Yes.
so there is, since we are not able to, run the videos here because of certain technical difficulties, I guess. So I will not, there were 2-3 videos in my presentation, so I'll just skip those one because we are not able to show them. Now, the first video which I was trying to show, this was a just 2 minutes video which was explaining. Is there any problem? So,
On है ना? Sorry for the technical. Sir, yes.
so in the first. Hello. Yeah. So yeah, I mean this 2 minutes video which was showing about explaining the European deal. The European deal was basically that you have very strict uh, targets which have been set by 2030, and then by 2050 they are going to have a zero, I mean, neutral kind of continent I was mentioning, and then the kind of policies which Europe has kind of going to follow in the next few years. And one important policy is about, now they are not talking about just economy. Basically now they'll be talking about circular economy. Now the circular economy is not in the linear economy. What we have is you take, make, and dispose all the products. In your circular economy, what you're going to do is you make products, use them, recycle them. So basically the product cycle has to be much longer. And the processes, all kind of products, services, what one is going to use is going to be in the circular economy more and more. So very little disposal basically you create. So by 2050, you will be using less energy. You will be reusing most of those products. This is so it means now they'll not be just talking about economy, but they'll be talking about circular economy. Now, in your circular economy, you the raw material. Sorry. मेरे को इधर ही रहना है. Okay, so I can't go. So. All right. Sorry, I think there are too many technicalities here. So then, so you have your product design and consumption, and everything is going to be very, very different in your circular economy. No, but why all these things are being taught? They are taught because of very simple reason, because you all know. It's about many, many years back. Now the whole debate is more or less settled, but this is about global warming. Now, what is this global warming? Which is rising your average temperature of the earth, which basically potentially damage the way the planet we live here. And if the global temperature rise by 2 or 3%, which most probably it will, that's what most of the studies are showing. So without any kind of intervention, it could lead to your rising sea levels, flooding of low-level areas, at the same time increased desertification. Now, this will have all kind of major social, political, and economic implications, not just only for Europe, but for the whole economy, the whole world per se. So this is not something I'm telling you new only in the context of Europe, but this debate has been going on. But in the context of Europe in the 1970s, they had a big commission on this. This was called the Stern Commission. So the Stern Commission came out with this particular publication, which is Economics of Climate Change, the Stern Review Commission. Now, this is available. You can just write Stern in your Googles. You can download this whole report. Now, what this particular report was saying in the context of Europe when they said, you know, the global temperature is going to rise. There are 4 ways of cutting these greenhouse gases. One is you reduce the demand of goods and services, which basically generate high level of emissions, number one. So you have to now, first the demand of all those goods and services has to be reduced, which are generating high level of emissions. You also have to increase the efficiency. So basically in which you can, now you see all the time you're talking about, on the star rating, this, that, all the gadgets, what we are using, efficiency of those, and all the houses which we are constructing, they should be with less air conditioning or less heating. Basically, we should be able to get the same heating or air conditioning. And then you also have to take actions to avoid harmful things such as deforestation. And then also moving towards low carbon technologies for power, heat, and transport, because this is three major areas: producing power, and in the context of Europe, because it's a cold climate, you also need a lot of heating, and then for the transportation. So these are the four major ways basically to cut all these greenhouse gases. This I'm talking about, which happened in 1970s by the Stern Commission in Europe itself. Now, then after that, we know that what we have is the UN Framework Convention for Climate Change, which is UNFCCC. So this was an important step forward where the globally all countries have come together. They talked about global environmental issues. Since then, we have so many, the meetings have taken place of this UNFCCC. And then you also have Kyoto Protocol in 1997. So, but the major difference between the UNFCCC and the Kyoto Protocol was that under the UNFCCC, what you have is all the industrialized countries, they basically, they were encouraged to stabilize their greenhouse gas emissions. But under Kyoto Protocol, there was binding commitments. So here in one way is that this is something good that every country must do it. So it's up to you whether you do it or not. This is just a kind of you're telling them that global warming is bad. These are the couple of things which you really need to do it. But here under Kyoto Protocol, which came into effect in 2007, there was 27 industrialized countries, and most of the European countries were part of this, where there were basically targets was set that by 2008 and between 2008 and 2012, these countries would basically reduce their greenhouse gases, and a certain numbers were given to all of them. The United States never ratified Kyoto Protocol, so they were not really became party to this, but most of the European countries were under Kyoto Protocol. Now, this is the context in which now you have to situate the European environment policies and the energy policies and what is happening currently in Europe. Now, if you look at EU, or now today the 27 countries of the EU, they have the most extensive environmental laws under any international organization. If you can today, look into this. And these international environmental laws, they have also the national laws, they have the regional, it means the European laws, and then they also have commitment at the international level. So you have the international commitments, European commitments, and the national commitments within Europe. And these are the issues which cover so many issues, which are, you have acid rains, thinning of ozone layer, your air quality, air pollution, waste and water pollution, sustainable energy. So roughly they have about more than 500 regulations and laws which deals with all these environmental issues. And even so look at very smaller issues. Look at, say, for example, noise pollution. Now, in noise pollution, have you ever wondered why, excuse me, can you share? There is something else they're talking about. Now, if you have, say, for example, noise pollution issues. Now, in noise pollution, most of the flights you see to Europe from India, have you ever wondered why they actually fly during the night? If you are going to London, to Paris, or any other country in Europe, most of your flights are actually from Delhi or many developing countries. They go from here, middle of the night, 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock. Why this happens? Because of all the environment, noise pollution laws and regulations within the European Union. Because most of the European airports are actually closed during the night. Except very few, 1 or 2 big airports like Heathrow or some others, which they have some flights, but most of the airports in Europe, they are closed by 10, 10:30, and they don't open before 5:36 in the morning. Because most of the flights, when they take off or land, there's a lot of noise is created, and the people, those who live around those areas, they don't want to be disturbed. So there are noise pollution laws. So since all airports are closed in Europe, so what they do is, like when they're coming to India, so they fly most of the things, their planes, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock from those places, they land up here in the middle of the night. So you take flight at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and then by the time you go back to Europe, it's 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the morning. So airline companies basically they don't want to keep their planes idle. Otherwise, they have to park and then they have to pay for that. They send those planes to other developing countries and then those they go there and then there's no noise pollution in Europe during that time. So we have all the noise pollution during the night. We have all the inconvenience because you can't really fly to Europe during the daytime. There are few flights where now you can go, but these are expensive ones compared to the flight what you take. So what I'm saying is this is just one example. If you look into all the 500, 700, whatever all the regulations, the environment policies they have, they affect the whole of the world because of all the very strict regulations what they have in Europe. So one can look into all those issues, but it's a very, very extensive environmental law what they have. Now, concern about environment is not something very new in Europe. I mean, it's actually not very old, I would say, because when industrialization started after the Second World War, the reindustrialization, because Europe was industrialized even before, but all the destruction which took place after the Second World War. And whether you look at all the Eastern European countries under the socialist system or in Western European countries, now all in both parts of the Europe, they never really bothered too much about environment at that point of time. It's not just only about Europe. In fact, most of the world, we were not really so much concerned about environment. At that point of time, the idea was basically just how you can have more and more progress, how you can have more and more material production. Now, the emphasis, if you look in the 1940s and the 50s, it was basically how do you can really promote recovery and material progress. And in fact, there was the first treaty, the EEC treaty, there was no reference to environment. Today, environment, climate is number one issue, policy issue in Europe. And when they actually came together, the first treaty they signed, there was not even a single mention of the word environment there. So it means it wasn't really there. Then even between 1957 and 72, the whole period was kind of characterized by very limited community action. But to the member states, they introduced some of their own initiative, but at the European level, very little actually was done as far as environment was concerned. Only in 1973, you can see there was a directorate journal which was created, which was basically, again, looking more into the nuclear safety issues rather than other environmental, because 70s was the period when there was oil crisis, and during that oil crisis, most of the European countries started going more towards nuclear. Say, for example, if you look at France today, about 70% of the electricity comes from nuclear power. So many countries started moving towards nuclear energy. So concern about nuclear safety and its impact on environment was much more bigger concern. So they had created Directorate General of Environment at that point of time. But then you have the first Environmental Action Plan in 1973 and 1976. Since then, every 5 years, you have different environmental action plans here. You look at, and then the countries like Austria, Finland, and Sweden, they joined the European Union in 1995. So these were the countries where awareness about environment was very high. So obviously, they've also brought environmental agenda into the European policy making. Then in 2004 and 7, many more countries, as you know, when the enlargement took place, these countries also joined, but they had many environmental problems, their own environmental problem, much bigger environmental problem. So as a result, since the mid-90s, you will find the environmental issues are becoming much and more important in all European policies. And as I was saying earlier, this was also the period when you have this Stern Review Commission, and then you have the UNFCCC and the Kyoto Protocol. So everything coming together, what you can see that by the end of the 90s, environment, climate is becoming, since then, much bigger issue in the European policy debates. But environmental is only one aspect of the broader sustainable development debate. In fact, in 1999, when they had Treaty of Amsterdam, so the first time they used the word sustainable development in the European policy documents. And the first time in 2001, they adopted the first sustainable development strategy. Since then, they have been revising this sustainable development strategy for Europe every few years. Now, what is the sustainable development strategy since then in the last 20 years they have? One is that they have many actions concerning natural resources, environment protection, and so here, since this is a very complex issue and also deals with many policy issues, so there is a policy coherence because if you are looking at sustainable development issues, so sustainable development also have to deal with agriculture policy, then you also have to have your urbanization, then what kind of industrial processes you are going to have. So it means, and then if you're also going to have, say, you're importing energy from outside through pipelines, through undersea pipeline. So all these issues will have your environmental concerns. So bringing into environment and sustainable development, this is what the sustainable development. Now, the core principles of the European environment policy are few of them. One is the use of your best available knowledge. So main thing is that, many of the answers for your environmental issues will come from science. So any new development in science, so, technology about solar is not new. Even 50 years ago, we had solar energy. Even 200 years ago, 300 years ago in Europe, they had, windmills. But the problem is the technology, it was still not very cost effective. Only thing is that why now we are able to use solar and wind energy today, what we were not able to use say 50 years ago or 100 years ago, because the scale was not there and the technology was still very, very expensive. So it means many things are possible now, environmental friendly things with the use of the best available technological enablement. So the one basic principle is use the best available knowledge. Second is precautionary principle. So it means wherever you can have a precaution where things which are going to destroy your environment, you have to be very, very precautious about those things, whether this is about forest, this is about other issues. And the most important principle, what they have been using now, is decoupling your resource use from economic growth. Now, we all know that when, like in India, when we say that we need 7% growth, we need 10% growth, 8% growth, the more growth you will have, the more goods and services you are going to produce, right? I mean, how you will have a higher growth? You will have higher growth when you will produce more agricultural goods, when you will produce more industrial goods, when you will produce more services. Now, all these things when you are going to produce, it's also going to use more energy because you can't just produce things like that. You're going to use more resources. You are going to have more energy usage. So it means if you want to continue to have higher growth, I mean, the basic principle, everybody used to think that you also need to have more energy. If you want 7% growth, you need this much energy. If you need 9% growth, whatever energy was required, you need more energy. Right? So now if you continue by that particular principle, that means, because ultimately resources are limited. So you can't just keep using resources because the requirements are much more, because people will continue, like in India, even if you have 7% growth, still many people would need more goods and services because many people are still very poor. Those goods needs to be provided to them. So you can't say that we will not have growth because ultimately all those goods and services have to be provided. So the fact of the matter now is that if that was the principle, we will never be able to have that kind of growth with more and more resource use. So that principle has to be changed, that you continue to have higher growth with the same resources or perhaps less and less resources. Then only you will be able to sustain higher living standards, also sustainable higher standards. So that's the basic principle. So you have to decouple now your economic growth from your resource use. So that's the basic principle which is fundamental, because otherwise we always thought that the more growth means more resources. Unless we are able to break this cycle, either we'll keep using more and more resources or will not be able to grow. So that's so we use, and that's only possible if you are able to technologically advance many things. So this is what the base, and then of course, if in certain ways, if still some people are polluting, because some of the processes, whether in agriculture or in industry, will still be there where the pollution would be created. So those processes, those industries need to be penalized. So these are 4 or 5 things which are the basic principles of European environment policy. And when you had, the Treaty of the European Union, the Treaty of Lisbon, Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union. So if you read this particular paragraph of this treaty, you can clearly see the issue of your growth, sustainability, environment, all coming into as a legal document that every policy, every document has to kind of reflect this reality. So what it says that they shall establish an internal market. It shall work for the sustainable development of Europe based on balanced economic growth and price stability, a highly competitive social market economy. So they're not talking about just market economy, but social market economy, which is also socially kind of accepted the kind of market economy you have, aiming at full employment and social progress and high level of protection and improvement of the quality of environment. So it means the environment is very much part of the preamble of the Treaty of the European Union, which is Article 3.2. So it means every law, every regulation has to kind of honor these principles of sustainable development, social market economy, and also very sensitive to the environment. Since then, you can have many environmental action plans. So I'm not going into details about this. If you're interested, you can read yourself. So every 5 or 6 years, they come out with environmental action plans. So the last one you had the 2013 to 20. These were the major priorities. Then this is the current one, which is going on till 2030. So the major 6 priority areas in which what they have in the environment one, the 2030 greenhouse gas emission reduction target. So the targets have become much higher now than even 5 years ago. So now roughly about what they are asking is that by 2050 it will be zero, but by 2030 itself, roughly about 45% emission what they used to have in 1990, they will try to cut about 45% of your targets, and then of course the climate neutrality by 2050, and then again the basic principle of your decoupling economic growth from resource use, and then there are many other concerning pollution, etc. So these are the environmental action plans they continue to have every 5-6 years. And the another important thing which in Europe they are using, which is European, what you call the EU ETS, which is emission trading system. Now, under Kyoto Protocol, which I said, which we discussed earlier, there were certain specific targets were there for all industrialized countries, including Europe. But since climate is a issue which is not just affecting one country or 10 countries or 20 countries in Europe, if you are able to emit more greenhouse gases in India, so it's not just only India is going to be affected, everybody else is also going to be affected. So similarly, if you're going to stop greenhouse gases in one place, the positive impact is going to be felt by everyone. So under emission trading system, what they're saying is that the responsibility of Europe is to cut this emission target by this. Now, whether you do it in Germany or you do it in Bangladesh, it's the same thing, right? Because ultimately it's going to affect positively everyone. Whereas similarly, whether you are going to do within Germany or in France, in industry A or industry B, impact is the same. So if the things are more expensive to have new technology, say in steel, and it's perhaps easier and less expensive in cars, so maybe you can concentrate more on cars and then less on this, because ultimately you are going to reduce this. So every enterprise, every major industry is going to get certain permits to emit greenhouse gases, because everybody they do it, and particularly the major industries. Now they have also been given targets that by such and every year this is what the target has been given to you. Now if steel industry is not able to fulfill that target because they're still emitting more, then they have to buy certain permits from other industries to compensate that. Other industries which are doing much more, they are using more green technologies. So it means it's a flexible. The flexibility again also has been provided under Kyoto Protocol because ultimately you are actually reducing it. You are reducing it here, you're reducing. So wherever it is easier, wherever it is less costly, you can perhaps start from that. So here So here what you have is the EU emission trading system. It operates now in more than 31 countries, all 27 countries plus Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, and UK. So roughly about 11,000 heavy industry energy using installations, particularly your power station, your industrial plants, and now airlines also, they have come to this. So this covers roughly about 45% to 50% of the greenhouse gases in Europe. So what they identified that these 11,000 units basically are emitting roughly about 50% of greenhouse gases of Europe. So if we concentrate on this, then we will be able to perhaps cover at least 50% of all the greenhouse gases, and these are the large installation you can identify, you can give them targets. So they start and they can be very flexible in this. So if they do not have any sufficient permits of their own, they must purchase basically those permits from other industries. So over time, what we do is every year the number of things that permits are going to be reduced. So there is going to be scarcity of those permits, and the price of those permits will go up. So it means those companies which are actually more efficient, which are using more green technologies, they will save more and more their permits, which they are able to sell to others. So if they are using more green technologies, they can also make money from this. So this is what the whole idea is, creating scarcity of these permits over time. So that's why it's also called what the cap and trade system, where a company A, say for example, in this photograph you can see, so they can basically sell this. So if company A is using more green technologies, they are able to save, this is the target which has been given to both of them. The other company which is basically still emitting more and more. So it means they will need more permits by the end of this year. So they have to buy those permits, the company which is basically saving them. So it means any company which is actually using more and more new technologies, more and more green technology, emitting less and less greenhouse gases, they will be able to save those permits. Either they can use it next year if they want to expand their company, or they can sell it to other companies, right? So it means even using green technologies, companies can actually make money. This is all the cap and trade system. In fact, there was a video about this again, but since the videos are not working, I'll not use this one. So in the first 2005 and 2007, this was the first trading. So this is what we call the European Union ETS trading system. So they started with this. Initially, they provided these permits free of cost to every company, depending on their past record, how much they were emitting in the earlier years. So accordingly, every company got those permits. And if any company was able to save those permits would be spared. Either they can keep it for next year or they can sell it to them. But this was what happened when they started in 2005 and 7. This was also the period when there was global financial crisis in 2007. And from 2007 till 2013, 14, 15, the whole European economy was in relatively crisis. So as a result, your economic activities decline. Since economic activities declined, many companies anyway did not need many permits because they were not able to produce much. They were not really expanding. So what happened was that almost every company had all those permits which were given to them. They just used unutilized because they were not able to really Because normally what you have is every company is trying to expand 3%, 5% every year. Since the demand was less, they were producing less. So in the initial few years, is the whole scheme really did not work. They had to actually, the price was almost zero. Then they had to 2008 to 2012, couple of more countries joined. At the same time, some of the new sectors were brought in, like aviation sector was brought in the EU ETS. In 2013-20, you have the next period, then the fourth period, which is now continuing from 20 to 30. But if you look at the price of this carbon, what is called the carbon price of these EU ETS, at one point of time, 2007-8, you can see the price was almost zero. So nobody wanted those permits. So many people started even saying that actually this scheme has basically failed in Europe because there are enough permits in the system and nobody is interested in those permits anyway, because economy is not growing. So they have to really reform it, change it, make it more restrictive. And then you can see by 2015 and 16 again, because these are the years when they had a lot of economic crisis, the economy was not growing. So this particular EU ETS scheme was not really working at all. Then you can see from just before the pandemic, again the prices started going up. So because maybe, countries or companies, they started thinking that now suddenly there's going to be more economic activity, we will need more permits. And then the price of those permits, as you can see, is going up. And if you can see, in the initial period, you had the oversupply of EU ETS, then they introduced certain reforms, and then you have the Brexit period when the Britain moved out from the European Union. Again, there was kind of negative impact. And then before the pandemic, suddenly price went up. Again, the pandemic has come, and now again the thing just depressed for a while. But now in the last couple of months, you can see the price is really touching pretty high because they're hoping that post-pandemic economic growth perhaps would be able to, many companies will suddenly expand. But now you have the Ukraine crisis and certain other kind of negative impact. So this is like a stock market, the things are going up and down depending on the circumstances. But still, this is one area through which, why this particular thing is important, because normally what was believed that the environment you are able to kind of control through government regulations, like normally what we do, that if there are certain, you have to take permission from the government to open new company, the government has to kind of, through all different kind of regulations. This is more of a market-based instrument, that market would kind of determine, market would decide, market would, through the market mechanism, you can basically also push companies to use more environment-friendly technologies. So this is the major difference between other kind of environmental regulations and the EU ETS scheme, because most of the policies in European Union, you will find the basic principle is about the market principle. Whether it's a free trade area, whether these are other. So it means using more market techniques or market instruments, you can actually even deal with the environmental issue. There's also more of an ideological point that you don't need government to intervene into this, but through market incentives, perhaps companies will behave automatically. Because this also makes sense, this also makes profit. So this is what the EU ETS scheme of the European Union is. But if you look at the old ETS scheme, there are three lines here. One is the cap, which was initially put there. And then the second line, what you see is, this is what the base case emissions. The emissions which have actually taken place or continue to going to take place by 2030. Now, and the lower one, the green one is, this is the low emission scenario. Now, if the earlier we go by this particular, if you go by this, now, this is what the cap was given. This is what your, the base case scenario is. Now, if emission was taking place there, so it means till 25, 27, there was very little hope that there would be market of EU ETS would be revived. Because this is the cap which has been given, and this is what the companies were actually using, um, their technologies through which they were emitting greenhouse gases. But here, if they are actually using more technologies, better technology, which many of the European companies have already, like you see, all the automobiles. Now they are coming with all the e-vehicles, electric vehicles, etc. So if most of the companies started doing that, then you are going by the low case scenario. Then even by 2030, they'll still be below the cap. So there won't be much demand for the EU ETS anyway. Since as a result, now what they have done is under the whole European Green Deal, now this cap has come down further. So if you have down now, so even if when you are using this, still you will need more and more permits basically to continue your company. So it means one is as things move, as companies are also using more and more technologies, green technologies, your also targets are also becoming more and more tough. This is what Europe has been doing. Now, this is what the environment part of this whole the Green Deal was. The second is your energy policy. I'll just take about 5-7 minutes to summarize this whole major policy. Now, from the very beginning, if you look at the European story which you have been hearing for the last many days now, from the very inception of the European project, you have the European coal and steel community, right? I mean, you gave a lecture on this whole thing. The coal and steel community means coal is again energy. And the steel also is very highly, they consume a lot of energy. So from the very beginning, one major treaty was your coal and steel community, where energy was an important part. Second, 1957 treaty, the Euratom. Euratom was again a treaty among the European nations about peaceful use of nuclear energy, mainly for power, because armament and everything is different. That's not part of your Euratom treaty. It means the basic energy thing within Europe was there from the starting of the European project itself. But there was a huge gap. The intentions were very high, but the outcomes were very limited as far as the energy policy was concerned. Because still there was no common energy policy as far as the European countries were concerned, because most of the countries were still using their own national policies rather than actually a European policy as far as the energy was concerned. And energy was not really a major concern for Europe till the early 70s anyway. Why? If you look at this particular graph, this is what your gross domestic products from 1955 till 1975, right? And this is what your energy consumption is. As I was saying, there was no decoupling of energy consumption and your growth. More you are growing, more energy is being used. And that's a kind of a normal thing which was happening everywhere. Because you are growing very fast, you are also using a lot of energy, because that's how things were there. Even to large extent, even now things are roughly the same. If you need more growth, you need more energy. This is what Europe was doing. But the only thing what you can see in this year, the coal consumption was going down. Why? Because Europe also had a lot of coal, resources, but they were not using their own coal resources because relatively it was not very clean. And then this was also the period from 1950 to 70 when global energy prices were very low, and the new resources of global oil was discovered. Particularly all the Middle Eastern oil came during this period. So a lot of new oil resources, oil and gas resources were available at a very low price. So this was a very good period as far as the Europe was concerned. You are growing fast, you are reconstructing Europe, a lot of energy is easily available globally at a very low price. So there was they never thought that energy could be actually a problem for economic growth. Because the problem is really demand, that more and more you keep producing, energy is available anyway at a cheap price. But then things changed. In the 1970s, 73, 79, you have the first and second oil shock. That suddenly they realized that energy which they thought is going to be available always at a cheaper price is not available now. So, and the policies what they had, first guidelines they came out in 1965. This was only about data collection, common energy market, and ensuring energy supply at the lowest cost. Whether energy is going to be a crucial geopolitical or environmental issue still wasn't really a major concern. But then, as I said, you have the oil shock in 1973 and 79. And then there were a lot of, impact on your economic activities. And then suddenly, basically, you realize that they have to do something about this energy because we are, like India, Europe is also dependent on the outside energy. And if you're getting outside energy and then there are certain disruptions, and suddenly your economic activity is not disturbed by this. So, but at the European level, still you're just looking at the crisis management role. You're not really looking at the common energy policy there. Every country was still pursuing its own policy. You have International Energy Agency, which was formed in 1974 with most of the countries of European countries. They were member of this, and those countries were relying more on the International Energy Agency to look into energy issues rather than the European institution or the European Union. In 1974, they came out with some kind of a new strategy. They wanted to propose a European Energy Agency, but still it was not really agreed by all members. But only thing what they were saying, they just set certain targets that by 1985 we'll be able to produce, kind of every country has to produce this, they have to diversify their, etc. Now, the major thing which started changing was your 1974 strategy. So what was this strategy? You want, because of the problem outside, reduction of oil imports. So first time they said that now we need to reduce those oil from importing from outside. But the question is, if you reduce those resources from outside import, then what do? Because then you have to develop your own resources. So what resources you can develop? Because oil and gas either you have or you don't have. Or it's not something that you can create. Like India have limited amount of oil and gas. If we don't have, we don't have. I mean, there's nothing. This is natural. And countries like in the Middle East, Iran, Iraq, etc., they have a lot of oil resources. They have. I mean, it's not something that, and many other countries. So these are natural resources. So if you do not have, if you don't want to import oil, then what do? Now they're talking about renewables, but in the 70s they were not talking about renewables because this was not feasible option. Cost was very high. Not that technology was not available. Technology was available. So only thing they went basically heavily towards nuclear. You look at in France what they used to say that we do not have resources, but we have ideas. All right, even if you don't have resources, but we have ideas, we have science, we can create something. So nuclear, yes. So today you can say about 70-80% today, all the electricity in France comes from nuclear energy. So this is all the impact of 1970s. When they started stopping, they thought that we have to diversify, create our own resources. And own resources they could create basically nuclear energy. It was risky, but they said, okay, we go by the scientific principles, we'll make all things that things go, according to our plans. We have faith in our scientists, we can do that. We have to develop heavily nuclear energy. This is what Europe went, in many countries in Europe they went. And then, of course, the rational use of your energy, you can, consume less, etc., saving efficiency, all those issues came. So this whole thing started in the 1974. Then again, they came out with a couple of new objectives, 79, 86, which are again just, so there is no policy as far as major Europe broadly is concerned. The European Commission's role is increasing somehow, but still it's a very limited. These are all the member state individual countries which are following their own path. So European Commission was still about information gathering, providing reports, giving certain kind of guidance, but not beyond that. Only in 2007, under Lisbon Treaty, they came out with energy policy. The first time common energy policy, this just came just about 15 years ago in 2007, where in the context of the establishment of the functioning of the internal market and preserve and improve the environment, the union policy of energy. So it means the first time they started using the word union policy of energy, and this is what the union policy of energy will do. Your functioning of your energy market, security of your energy supply and energy efficiency, and European level network infrastructure created together. So it means the first time in 2007 they came out with this policy. I'll just quickly looking, but of course, energy policy is also very much linked with your foreign policy, with your environment policy, climate policy, etc., because all these things are linked. So it has to be synchronized with other policies as well. 2007 policy, as I said, these are basically looking into this. Now, since then, we have three major strategies which has come. You have 2020 energy strategy, you have 2030 energy strategy, and you have 2050 energy strategy. And now, of course, beyond that, you have the energy union, and then you also have now your what you call green energy. So in 2020 energy strategy, what this strategy was, your 2020 strategy is your 2020 by 2020. So what is this 2020? So there are three 20s by 2020. You reduce your greenhouse gas emission by 20%. So this is the first 20. So this was the strategy which actually they overshoot actually by 2020. They fulfilled all these promises by 2020. So 20% reduction in greenhouse gases compared to what they were in 1990. The second 20 is share of renewables in the overall energy mix to 20%. The first 20 is your greenhouse gas reduction 20%. Second 20 is 20% renewables in your energy mix. And the third 20 is your increase in the energy efficiency of 20%. So 320 by 2020. So this was the first 2020 strategy of the European Union. And then all other strategies, 2030 strategy, 2050 strategy, these numbers are just targets have moved up. Like 2030, from 20% it will go. Earlier it used to be 30%, 32%, but now under Green Deal it will become 45%. So it means you just, and by 2050 it's going to be 100%. So it means these three basic things they are working on: reducing greenhouse gases, improving efficiency, and bringing more renewable into the mix. And then the numbers will keep changing, targets will keep changing. And to achieve those three targets, all the policies, what you really need to do, you have to follow your policies. And then to implement those policies, all the resources what are required. So this is what the whole story of the European Green Deal or the European Environment and Energy Policy is. Three things: concentrate. By 2050, 0%. By 2050, more or less everything is going to be renewable. And then it will become very efficient. So whatever you are going to use, and I can give you the number individually country-wise if you're interested, like whatever the energy Germany is using in 2009, they want to use that energy only 20% by 2050. By the time, of course, the economy will grow 5 or 6, 7 times bigger. But you will be, it means whatever you are using in 2007, you will be using in 2050 less energy by then, but you will be producing much more than the decoupling your economic growth from your energy use. So this is what the whole story of your in the European. So these are the targets of 2030. So 20% become 40%, renewable become 27%, energy saving become 20 to 27%. Similarly, and then you have different proposals for this. As I said, to achieve that, you need different policies. And then you have the 2050 roadmap, which now this roadmap has also been revised further. Earlier, it used to be 80 to 85%. Now it has become 100%. So it means net zero neutrality by 2050. And then for that, because why you need to talk about 2050 today itself? Because energy is one area where you need long-term investments. Like if you want to have a nuclear power plant in India, you have by 2040, 2035, you have to start thinking today, because the whole process takes 10 to 15 years till the time you are going to produce. Any major renewable projects is also going to take longer, because it's not just only about producing your renewables. So that renewable has to be linked with your infrastructure, with your grids. And these things take time. So if you want to achieve something by 2050, you have to start working from 2020 itself. Then only you will be able to get something by 2050. And in between again, you have to keep changing your target depending on your technologies, depending on economic conditions. So this is what the major and the typology of your EU energy policy is. There are so many internal things they need to do here. in the common market principles, and then you all the external policies, whether the foreign policies, the pipeline, geopolitics, everything else is going to be linked with this. So from this, in 2015, when the Juncker Commission came, the last European Commission, the head of the European Commission wanted his own approach. So he came out with the European Energy Union. So this energy union would be looking into many things than what these three targets were. And then you had in 2006 and 2009 the first disruptions from Russia to Ukraine, because Russia, as you know, the European energy, they are very much dependent on the Russian part. So in 2015, it's text itself, if you look at, if you look at just these three numbers, this was 2015. This EU imports about 53% of its energy from outside. So it means more than 50% energy of different kinds, what they use, oil, gas, coal, it comes from outside. And energy import dependency related to the crude oil is almost 90%. Natural gas was 66%. Solid fuels like wood, etc., 42%. Nuclear fuel, because even if they have nuclear, but uranium, etc., come from outside. So it means all kind of energy what you are going to use, you are heavily dependent, like India, we are dependent on outside. So they are looking in that energy union from energy security market, from energy efficiency markets, etc. And this is what they have to look into, this energy union, the convergence of different kind of policies. If you want to achieve efficiency, it means all kind of housing has to be built like this, that you need less energy for heating or air conditioning. Similarly, all agriculture processes, what you are going to use, it has to be very different than what you are doing today if you really want to have less energy usage in the years to come. Similarly, all transport, what you are going to use. So it means energy union is not just only about energy. It's also about what kind of industry you are going to have, what kind of agriculture you are going to have, what kind of housing you are going to have, and what kind of new research you are going to. So everything, so it is linked with so many other policies. This is what the policy convergence at a large level is about your energy union. And I'm not going to different countries, different policies, but if you just look at one country like Germany, and one policy which from 2007-8 they are using, which is called the Energiewende, which is one of the very ambitious policy in Germany, what they have started. So this is a complete restructuring of your energy sector. It's not just only energy sector, but it's also the whole transformation of the total economy. This is what they said after Second World War. The first time that the Germany, like after Second World War, Germany was reconstructed. But now they are going to reconstruct again the whole economy. Most of the buildings are going to be demolished. They are going to have environment-friendly buildings. All new infrastructure is going to be created. All automobile sector is going to be changed. All your, everything, whatever they have been doing is going to be restructured again. So it's a big gamble because you may fail if things go wrong. And then the energy, within the energy wing, they also wanted to move out from the energy, nuclear energy by 2022. So most of the nuclear power plants they have shut by now. Only few are operating now, which they perhaps will, by the end of this year, they will close down. So what the targets, what they had under energy window, this is just one country policy I'm telling you. You look at gross energy consumption. So in 2008, energy consumption, what they had, by 2050, the energy consumption is going to be just 60% of that. In between, you will see from 2010 to 2050, economy will grow many times, but the energy they will be using by 2050 would be only 60%, and only 50% of that energy. And out of that 50%, 60% of that energy will come from a renewable sector. So it means this is how the kind of energy consumption is going to be in case of Germany. If you look at all the heat demand in the buildings, the kind of new building which they are going to build by 2050, only 20% heating is going to be required. That the kind of heating which is required today. Similarly, in transport, only 60% energy would be used, even with all new transport added by 2050 then. So this is the kind of, the ambitious programs actually most of the European countries, only one country, as I said, but many other countries also have similar kind of programs. So the last point before I finish is on what is happening on the Ukraine war and its impact. As I said, this is very much dependent on the outside energy. And if you look at the numbers here, between 2000 and 2010, about 40% of natural gas to Europe, to EU, basically comes from Russia, right? About 25, 26%, this is 2020 figures, and you can see between 2010 and 2020. So about 1/4 of your oil also comes from Russia. About 45% coal also comes from Russia. So this is the reality of the European energy situation today. And when Russia, they have tensions now, the war is going on in Ukraine. So obviously, today, if you look at gas, I'm not going to all the numbers, but between 2015 and 2020, the average gas what what Europe used to get from Russia, today they are getting only about 20 to 25% of this gas. So the number, for various reasons, the number has come down. Similarly, the oil, anyway, they have stopped producing, importing from Russia. So if that is what the case is, because you're heavily dependent on outside and from outside on the Russian energy, and you have a tension now with Russia, the war is going on. So what kind of policy response Europe is actually doing? Now they have come out with a new policy response to this, which is called the policy, what you call the Repower EU. So within this Repower EU, the plan really is to rapidly reduce the dependence on the Russian fossil fuels. The fossil fuels, basically what they have, gas, oil, and coal. And also fast forward your green transition. So it means if you are not importing from Russia, then what will you do? So you have to find somewhere. Like in the 70s, I said, the oil is not coming from the Middle East, then you go for nuclear. Now, when the oil and gas is not coming from Russia, you cannot go nuclear because there's a different debate going on. Countries are actually moving out from nuclear anyway. Many countries in Europe. Not all countries, but like countries like Germany, and there is very little public kind of acceptance of new nuclear power plants in Europe. Because a nuclear power plant is something like this. Everybody likes it. Like if somebody tells you that there is a shortage in UP of electricity, so we are going to install a nuclear power plant in UP. Everybody will say, all right, it's good, right? But if somebody tells you, we are going to set up nuclear power plant next to Galgotia University, then you will worry that, we don't know. I mean, if there is a radiation, if there is something else. So nobody wants to be, next to the nuclear power plant. All the nuclear power plant is okay. So long as the big talk somewhere else. If they are doing it in Tamil Nadu, Konarkula, fine. If they're doing it in Jaitapur in Maharashtra, I don't care. I mean, it's okay. Even if in UP, if they are doing it in somewhere else, it's okay, but not to the next to my house. So the problem is somewhere it has to be established. But where is that somewhere? Because in a country like India or in many other places, when the density is very high, somebody would be living next to that nuclear power plant anyway. Why there is a movement against nuclear power plants in those areas where the plants are being set up, not by another area, because people are worried, those who are living there. Similarly, in Europe also there's a lot of resentment against new nuclear power plants. So there is very little appetite now for new nuclear power plant. So if there's no nuclear, oil and gas is going to be reduced. Already it's reduced from Russia. So what do? They already have planned for the green transition. So now they have to just fast forward, accelerate that transition. That's what they are going to do. So 3 or 4 things under this Repower EU you have. Accelerate your clean energy transition, diversify your energy resources, and you save your energy. So saving more, moving more towards renewables. This is what perhaps they are going under the Repower EU. And there was there was a video for what the Repower EU is, but actually our videos are not working. So it's okay. So this is what the broad story of the European Green Deal is, which is basically that Europe is very much dependent on outside energy, but now they have made this plan to kind of move more towards green transition, and the war in Ukraine has really accelerated this trend. By 2050, they want to be, you know, kind of, net neutrality. Bilkul neutral means they are not going to add new greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. This is what the whole plan, and they're very ambitious plan, and they have all these resources at their disposal. And there's a lot of political, I would say, acceptance, because unlike other parts of the world, in Europe, climate change and environment is very much part of the political debates. In fact, almost every political party, unless they have brought this issue at their, in the policy agenda, because they know that people really like it. And in fact, you have a survey in Europe, what is called the Eurobarometer, which is, if you ask European citizens, what are the major issues concerns you? And for the last 10 years, number one or two number issue is always climate change and environmental issues. So it means the awareness about environment and climate is very high. So as a result, this is also a very big political issue. It's the agenda of every political party and every government, and this is what they are doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for this wonderful and insightful session and for highlighting the key principles of European environmental policy, and especially, climate change as an issue and how Europe is dealing with it, and what are the initiatives that have been taken by European Union to build a sustainable environmental policy. Thank you so much. Now the floor is open for discussion. I would request my participants to please be brief and short as we are running out of time. So we can take 2-3 questions. So the floor is now open for question Q&A round.
My question to you is, India are developing meaningful. Developing means 249 gigawatts of solar for this development. Do you think that nuclear energy can constitute the demand of coal energy? Because this is last lecture.
Yeah, it's very interesting question that what in India we can do about nuclear energy. In particular, we are so much dependent, as you have rightly mentioned, on coal energy, which, by the way, everybody knows that coal is not a very clean energy. But most of our power plants are actually coal-based power plants, because we also import almost 80% of our oil from outside. We do not have much gas resources either. Unlike Europe, we do not have any pipeline which connects us with other, although we are very close to actually energy producing countries. I mean, look at the whole West Asia, Middle East, Central Asia, which is major sources of energy which are very close to us. So we are importing actually large amount of energy from those countries. Now, nuclear energy as an answer to India's problems, this is not a very simple question. Yes, one is that broadly, India needs to diversify. That's very clear. It's on all policy documents about Indian energy security. You look at today, everybody has talked about we need to diversify our energy resources. We need to diversify also our sources of energy. Means, one, what we are using today, if we are using more coal today, we need to use something more, something else which is more environmentally friendly to this. Second thing is the sources of energy from where we are importing. As I said, 2/3 of our energy comes from Middle East, and which is an area which is relatively politically unstable, right? And you don't want to politically dependent on one area, so you need to diversify your resources. Now, within that diversification, nuclear option is also there. But the fact of the matter is that we have been talking about this for now so many years. Still, we have not been able to add much as well as the nuclear energy. Only few nuclear power plants we have with the Russian help, which we have in Kodakala, in Tamil Nadu. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, Tarapur is the old one, but it's still very small. I mean, the new one website. And then you also have in Jaitapur, which was signed with the French and in Maharashtra, that still has to work because they're very So at the moment, if you look at percentage wise, the addition of nuclear energy is still very, very good. So still we are not really opting, I mean, we are not saying that nuclear option is not there because since we have to diversify, if possible, we also, if we can produce nuclear energy, it's all right. But at the same time, as I was mentioning, there is also a bit of problem where do you really situate those nuclear power plants because there is also local resentment wherever you try to build those nuclear power plants. But even if you somehow able to manage that, one is that in the nuclear power plants, gestation period is very long. It takes long. Investment is very high. And there are also certain concerns about radiation, etc. But of course, now technology is not new, so you can actually manage that technology. But because of large investment, and also again you have to dependent even for the nuclear fuel also on outside. And all, I mean, uranium comes only from few countries, and uranium you have in Russia, in Kazakhstan, in Canada, in Australia. These are only few countries, and everybody is sourcing basically from. So it's not that even if you have nuclear energy, you will be totally self-dependent or self-reliant. It's not going to be the case because still you need that source to produce nuclear energy from outside. At the same time, many of those nuclear power plants you also have to come under the IAEA. So they also have to manage that you're not because you can also produce nuclear weapons. You also have to produce nuclear energy. So if you are now Americans are not going to give you or any other European or other because they'll be if you take their technology, working with them, then obviously they also would be very careful that this it's not diverted somewhere else. So those things will be very clearly monitored, right? Because you can do it yourself, your own nuclear power plant, but not in this. So the option is very much there, but still the experience has been in the last 10, 15 years that we have not been able to add much. And the likelihood of nuclear energy becoming a game changer in India is very unlikely because of various factors. So only thing which actually can become game changer now is renewables. This is what I think the last few years the government has also come out with very ambitious plans. Because now in the last 10 years itself, the cost of production of new renewables has really come down. Like earlier, 10 years, 12 years ago, to produce 1 unit of power through solar was about 10, 12, 14 rupees, 15 rupees. Today it's 2, 3 rupees. So it's comparable to your other sources of energy. So if you can actually produce more through renewables, which is more or less you will become more self-reliant because you can produce the technologies. Not that everything you can produce because still solar panel, etc. we are sourcing from outside many of them. But that's one area where I think the more focus is going to be in the next 5 to 10 years. That's what it looks like. Not really.
So I have a question. I have 2 questions. One is that being a multilateral supranational body, how difficult it is to come to an agreement among all the 27 countries for a environmental deal or something. Second is first question. Second question is related to in your opinion, what do you think is there any possibility in the near future that Europe can become independent in terms of gases gas import from Russia?
Well, as far as, of course, I mean, you're right. I mean, it's always very difficult to come to any kind of agreement if there are 27 countries. But, this is one issue, climate and environment, where there is actually very little disagreement among member states of the European Union. So, I mean, they might have other problems as far as, say, for example, on other political issues, whether it was the Iraq war, whether what is happening in Afghanistan, or other major political foreign policy issues. But as far as climate change and environmental issues are concerned, I think there is less of a disagreement among member states. Because why I was saying, because as I said, there's a lot of awareness among European citizens about climate change issues. Second thing is, if you look at from extreme left to extreme right, all political parties in all 27 countries. Because normally in other countries, you will find that rightist parties were relatively less ambitious about climate goals. It was more liberal left parties which were kind of more. I mean, look at like President Trump, moved out from the Paris Climate Agreement. But again, when President Biden has come, this has kind of went against it. But in Europe, you will find most of the political parties in all 27 countries, there is an agreement on this. Whether, your other political ideology may be different on different issues. But as when the climate issues are concerned, there is more agreement. So there is a less of a problem as far as within 27 countries on this. What was the second one, sorry, that question?
Whether in near future, Europe has any chance of being
Okay, one more question. Yeah. So no, this is what in fact I was explaining about the repowering EU program, because now they know that they are heavily dependent on Russian fossil. So, like yesterday I was listening, the Dutch energy minister was saying that we are addicted to two things for many, many years. One, on fossil fuels, and second, on the Russian fossil, which is not going to be sustainable now. So I think it's very clear to many European policymakers now that they simply cannot depend on Russia now as well as are being concerned. But you cannot really change things overnight. The pipelines which have been built decades old, I mean, they are there. Similarly, the linkages which have been created with the European countries, with the Russia on energy situation, it cannot change overnight. But I think they are preparing for the worst. They know that anytime Russia can stop energy, sending energy to Europe, which is already happening. Like even if you look at in the case of Germany, Nord Stream 2 has not been operationalized, Nord Stream 1 pipeline has also been stopped today. Russia has also stopped sending gas to France in the last few days. Of course, they are saying the technical issues, some maintenance, etc. But you never know. But they are preparing in the next 2 or 3 years that they may not get any energy sources from Russia. So where do they begin? So it means if you are getting gas through pipelines from Russia, if you're not going to get, then after 6 months, and you cannot change everything renewables within 2 years, or maybe by 2030 you will be able to achieve much, but not by 2024 or 2025. So obviously then you have to tap other energy sources of gas, particularly because many of the things are gas based in Europe. So where do you get those gas? You have to get gas from Middle East, from Latin America, from America, from anywhere else. One is that's going to be expensive because you have pipelines with Russia, but there you have to import from outside, and pipelines cannot be built overnight. This takes time, and these are longer pipelines. If you want to build somewhere else, it's going to be huge investment. It may become operational only after 10 years, 7, 8 years. So at the moment, what they're doing is they're looking at LNGs. So LNG you can just import tankers. Right? The LNG, that's the reason the LNG prices have gone up. But even for LNG, they don't have even infrastructure even for LNG imports. Means you also need ports where you have those things. You can import all the LNG tankers. So within a year or so, they are going to have many ports where they can import more LNG from outside. That's in transition from now till 25, 27, 2030. So all those plans are there. So ultimately, I think they have decided that they will move away from Russian fossil fuel It will be difficult, it will be expensive, but this is what the political decision has been made, but it's going to take some time. And the meanwhile, today, what you can see, the prices of gas in Europe has gone 4 times. Price of electricity has moved, I think, increased by 3 times in the last few months. So this is going to increase your costs. All the industries, whatever you're producing, all the gas and electricity, what you're using, if you're now spending 3 times, 2 times, 4 times more, then your products are going to be expensive. You are going to be less competitive in the international market. So these are all worries. These are all problems. At the same time, when the price of energy goes up anywhere, your inflation also goes up. This is direct linkages. Today, inflation in Europe is something about 8 to 9%, which Europe never faced this kind of inflation. Because Europe inflation for the last 10, 15, 20 years was below 2%. Today, many of the countries actually have inflation, something about 15, 16%. The average EU is about 9%. So they never faced this kind of inflation for the last 40 years. The same is also with the US. So now, obviously, this will have impact on your economic activity. So what is happening in the energy front is also affecting your economic all activities. So things are difficult. But of course, they have decided they will move away from Russia. It will take some time, it will be expensive, and it will also impact their economic activities in the next 2 years.
Thank you so much, sir. On behalf of the organizing team, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to you, sir, for taking out your valuable time and being with us here today. We all are really very much overwhelmed by your benign presence. Before we conclude our today's session, I would request Dr. Manasi Sinha to please come forward and present her newly published book to you.
Just to inform you, he is the faculty who taught me European studies in JAU. मुझे याद आ गया। सुबह सुबह हम लोग जाते थे मॉर्निंग में 20 मिनट का और सर रूम में हम सारे स्टूडेंट्स बैठ के and sir start his lecture and love listening to him. So thank you so much for providing that and thank you so much.
We'll start the session in 5 minutes. Okay. So you can take a picture